Shirin from PeaceVigil. PeaceVigil works on peace education. Over the years, we have met some people whose influence on and support for our work has been simply incomparable. Sameer Dosani, our co-director, and I met Dr. Satinder Mohan Bhagat over 20 years ago. And from the moment we met him, we were touched by his humanity, his generosity, and his commitment to a more just and peaceful world. Dr. Bhagat retired as a professor of physics from the University of Maryland, USA. He has been constantly supporting social movements in India, whether they fight against poverty, communalism, casteism, corruption, or for the rights of the tribal people. He has been a volunteer with AID, Association for India's Development, that works for a sustainable, equitable, and just development in India. Dr. Bhagat has been a true pillar of strength for PeaceVigil. Peace education is a top priority for him, something that should be part of our lives from the very beginning. We last met Dr. Professor Bhagat 2 years ago at an event that he helped organize on the diversity of India at the University of Maryland, USA. We are in UMD today. We have come to meet Dr. Bhagat because we have an event tomorrow in UMD to celebrate the diversity of India. And Dr. Bhagat has booked a room for us. And in any case, whenever we come to DC, we always meet with Dr. Bhagat. This is UMD campus, with which we have a long connection. We have performed here many times, attended many meetings, and we continue to do work here. The pandemic has made it impossible for us to meet him since then, but we have been in constant touch with him. Dr. Satinder Mohan Bhagat will be 90 years old next year. We decided that we must share his experiences and observations with our viewers. This is the first part of our conversation with him. It concentrates on the partition of India in 1947 when Dr. Bhagat was 14 years old. Looking back at your life, especially the phase that you spent in India, how do you view the partition of India and the initial years of independence?
Well, let's put it this way. When the partition of India happened, the general impression that one had was, of course, this is all learned from just listening to other people, because at 14, and especially when you are the smallest, the youngest child in a family of 7 siblings, most of the conversation leaves you out. And approaching the partition, people's feeling was that there will be a line separating them from us, but otherwise things will stay as they are, more or less.
I see.
Nobody, including my family, 3/4 of my mother's family, 3/4 of my father's family, both of my sisters are in Lahore. And they had never planned that they had to leave. But within 6 months, everything changed.
Dr. Bhagat, was there an idea? I know that most people were against partition. Nobody really wanted it. Common people wouldn't want to move from one place to another in such a situation where you have lived there for generations. But when do you think people actually started thinking that this will be a reality, that partition will actually happen?
Well, the other thing that one has to keep in mind also is that, in fact, nobody was expecting things to happen that quickly. Everything happened very quickly, mainly because of the fact that after the war, Britain was completely bankrupt. They had absolutely no way to keep on supporting a continent as large as India. So Mountbatten was sent to India get rid of it within 6 months. And so when he arrived, in the beginning, most people were still thinking that it is going to be several years before anything is going to happen and we will have time to prepare. But indeed, he got rid of it within 9 months.
So your family
So
had
it
very
was
little time to organize the move.
none whatsoever. Nobody was thinking that this was going to be happen within 6 months. So in fact, you can see what my sister, that was my second sister from the top, who had come from Lahore, and we had all gone to Srinagar for a holiday right around the middle of August. And so they were holidaying in Srinagar, thinking that they are going to go back.
Oh, so you were part of that holiday. You were there
Yeah,
in
we were all
Srinagar.
and in fact, that holiday turned out to be one of the most beautiful things that has ever happened to me.
I see.
Because right in the middle of that holiday, guess who visited?
Gandhiji.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we all, the family, we went. He was staying in a place called Burzilla in Srinagar. All of us went there, and it was a fantastic experience. This is 40. This is in 47.
47. Okay.
He had come to Kashmir, and everybody was hoping that he would be able to talk to the Maharaja and tell the Maharaja that for God's sakes, make up your mind. This idea that Kashmir is going to be an independent country like Switzerland is a bunch of hooey. You cannot get away with it. But the Maharaja was an idiot, with due respect. I mean, the old man is dead, so I should not say anything. He absolutely refused to do anything. And then, of course, the Pakistan had its own problems. The British were able to keep the northwest frontier province relatively quiet by bribing people. Pakistan had nothing to bribe, therefore they let them loose into Kashmir. And the Maharaja still didn't give up until Baramulla fell. Baramulla was where the power station, suddenly Srinagar was dark. So our illustrious Maharaja got into his fleet of cars and abandoned Srinagar. At that time, if there had been a riot in Srinagar, not a single Hindu would have survived. There
So
was no
what
police, there was nothing.
I see.
At that time, Sheikh Abdullah and Bakshi organized young Muslim boys to go and become a vigil in the Hindu community areas. Punjab was boiling. Bengal was boiling. Srinagar was peaceful, totally peaceful. So those people were able to tell us that if the people are ready to work with each other, we can do it.
I have also heard that the same thing happened in the Pashtun areas where Frontier Gandhi organized people so that no
Exactly.
rioting will happen.
Exactly.
So you think that if people try, uh, or at least like the leadership had tried, things would have been quite different. The kind of violence that took place, the amount of deaths that happened, the
Oh,
rapes,
no.
and the
No question about it. You see, as I said, I was not an activist or anything, but the fact of the matter is that people, a little later than that, people started saying nasty things in Jammu also. Of course, Jammu was majority Hindu. So what did we do? We started taking Prabhat ferries every morning.
I see.
About 20, 30 of us would get together and we would sing our way around not only in the Hindu areas, but also the Muslim areas. In fact, our particular home at that time was right at the edge of the local Muslim community. So we would walk through that and so on and so forth. And by and large, we were able to keep Jammu relatively peaceful.
Dr. Bhagat, what kind of political ideology, if any, was practiced by your family? Were they pro Congress, pro, like what was their ideological bent?
Well, you see, for that to, my father was, in some sense or the other, an outsider. My father was a lawyer, but he did not have any law degrees. So he was not allowed to practice in British courts. He could only practice in a state court.
I see.
So he was a Punjabi, but he was practicing in Kashmir. But he was not he was not allowed to become a citizen of Kashmir, because to be a citizen of Kashmir you had to have property. It was a catch 22. To be a citizen, you must property. To have property, you must be a citizen. Anyway, so in some sense, we were a part of the Punjabi community, which were in some sense outsiders.
Okay.
In fact, every time they got angry with my father, they would push him out of the country, out of Kashmir. Back in around 1939 or 38, when I was 4 or 5 years old, he was told to get out of Kashmir and had to stay out for 2 weeks. Because there was
Is that because of his legal practice or
no. That was because of the fact there was a roti agitation.
okay, so
There was a food problem. There was a roti agitation. He was leader of the roti agitation, and the government decided to extern him, so to speak. And this was a few weeks before the, the wedding of my eldest sister. So, so in that sense, you see, we were in some sense outsiders. We had to make a place for ourselves in every possible occasion.
were there many Punjabis in Jammu?
Oh yeah, well, I would say that the only people we knew were Punjabis, so to speak.
Okay.
So I would say perhaps
That
maybe 10% or so of that
10.
order.
I see. You told me that it was a very beautiful experience for you to see Gandhi in 47 in
Yes,
Kashmir. So
yes.
I'm guessing that your family did like him if you all went to see him.
Well, all I
Or
can say is,
or
all
was
I
it
can
or
say,
was it because he was famous?
no. There was, I mean, I cannot tell you exactly what the experience was, because just just looking at him, there was this peculiar kind of a light that his eyes had. Before he came from around the corner, many people were shouting, because there are Hindutva types everywhere. Go Gandhi, go back, Gandhi. And then just as he turned, you could have hear a pin drop. It was clear to everybody that this was not the kind of human being you're ever going to see again. So just drink up what he is offering.
And you still remember that moment.
Oh, yes. Two moments I will never forget. The other one I told you about in an earlier talk, because several months later, that light went out forever.
It's a very, very painful thing that happened. And
Yes. So when
whoever,
you were telling me I was crying, my parents were crying, my neighbors were crying, everybody was crying.
True.
Everybody
And
realized.
unfortunately, the people who killed him are today in charge.
Well, the fact of, yes, that is true. That is why I no longer sing Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara, because it's not true.
But when you look back today, why do you think that the Hindutva forces have been able to come into power? I'm not talking of, the various electoral things that they have done, but the fact that they have been able to spread their venom so widely across India, despite the fact that they killed a man like Gandhi, who epitomized everything good in us.
Well, you see, now I have to go back a few more years. This is around 41, 42 or so. We were 8 or 9 years old. We used to live, our home was right across from the where the RSS Shakhas used to meet.
I see.
And so we, I mean, that was true of a large number of people. When the young boys, we were just encouraged to go, and we started participating with there, and do exercise and so on. The, and then this is in 41, 42, something of that order. What do you think they were singing?
Um,
जो
well,
जीवन स्वतंत्र नहीं तो जी करके क्या होगा ऐसे स्वराज से यदि हिंदुत्व न होगा. So there is nothing new about Hindutva.
that is very shocking, and this is right at the height of the national movement.
So this is before partition. This is obviously, if it was happening in Jammu, it was happening everywhere else also.
And Dr. Bhagat, do you remember anybody questioning this?
Not that I knew of. Of course, it is true that, for instance, in some sense, yes, I would say. So this takes me back to another situation where, see, my father belonged to a club where there were some Muslims also. So once things began to get nasty, they were essentially under pressure to leave. But many of them didn't have too much funding. So my father helped to raise funds for them and so on and help them. Now that somehow just got out. And it was not too long after that a whole crowd showed up outside our house. And we were on the other side of the door. My mother, my sister, we all were obviously crying because we were afraid that any moment they were going to kill him. But there were a few people who spoke from the back. अरे ये भगत साहब हैं, इनको तो 10-15 से बरस हो गए हैं हमारे साथ काम करते, छोड़ो, चलो कहीं जाओ और जाओ. So there were some people who had some sense. But at the same time, there were people who were very happy that Muslims were leaving.
I would also like you to tell me a little bit more about the Shakhas. How often did you go? What happened there? You gave the example of this song, which is horrible because it was being sung in the early 40s when the movement was at its peak and we were trying to get rid of British colonialism. Are there any other examples you can give from your going to the Shakhas, which you would think were against India. Are there any other examples you can think of? What kind of things were taught to you? What kind of things were said or done?
No, no. I mean, for instance, there were some. This is I don't remember the precise details, so forgive me for that. But there were some children of some servants who were clearly Dalits, although at that time Dalit word was not very common. By and large, they were more or less discouraged from coming to the Shaka. So that was another, if you like, symbol of exclusivity
I see.
rather than inclusivity.
I see. And Dr. Bhagat, did you go every week?
Every day,
Every
Shaka used to meet every day. And we quit going only because in 44, we left that area. We moved to another house.
Why people were going to these shakas? What was it that was being provided there?
In our case, and in case of several other kids, it was essentially one way of spending an hour in the evening where you could do exercises.
When Gandhi ji was killed, after that, what happened with the shakas? Because there was a temporary ban. Do you recall anything about what
No,
happened immediately?
as I told you, personally, we quit the Shaka in 1944 because that's when we moved. After that, we had nothing to do with it. And in fact, that particular place where the Shaka used to meet, I can say that nothing met because that became a refugee camp.
I see.
And I worked after the attack from Pakistan. Huge number of refugees showed up in Jammu. In the beginning, by that time, the college was closed. So people like me and a few other younger people, we first when the refugees came, we had to go and collect food for them. After a while, things were arranged so that some of them could go into these small rooms which were in a part of the temple. So a refugee camp was set up. And I became the sort of assistant with the slightly older guy. So we took care of that refugee camp for about 6 months. So then, of course, there
Yeah.
was no question of anybody meeting there.
Yes. So, Dr. Bhagat, tell us a little bit more about your experience helping out the refugees. And also, I would specifically like to know if you recall RSS helping the refugees.
But I cannot recall anything about RSS helping the refugees, although there is no question that many years later, when AID started helping people after various things, one of the reasons we got into it in a big way is because whenever something nasty happened, the first people who showed up there were RSS types. So uh, they are quite organized from that point of view. So, but at that time, if there were anything, I was not aware of it.
So, you helped them independently. It had nothing to do with the
No,
Shaka
no.
or anything.
The help was essentially that it took a while for the government to organize things. Therefore, after a while, we would get, I think, rice and dal and so on. For a long time, we could only get rice and dal from going to people's houses. The two of us would carry 3 buckets. In one bucket, you would get vegetable, one bucket dal, and the third one there would be rotis and chawal. And that's how we fed the refugees for a while.
And
After a
Dr.
while, the government,
Bhagat, were these mostly Hindu refugees?
oh, of course, almost all of them. And they were in very bad shape. Let's not go into that. I, I mean, no. Something was very wrong. I was cured of religion completely at that time. And
I would not like to push you to say anything. If you feel like telling us, about
Yeah,
the
yeah,
camp
but the
itself?
point is that
Yeah.
the refugees had come with, they were as just barely alive, is all I can say that. And it took some time, and there were people with various kinds of traumatic experiences and so on. And we had no experience of that. And once I made the mistake of making a suggestion when the doctor was visiting. The doctor turned around and said, "Dekhiye, mister, hum aapse nahi sunte hai." I said, "Fine, I'll keep quiet." Anyway, so yes, but that lasted for about 6 months or so. Then the college opened. I went back to college and so on.
When something traumatic like this happens, we are tested to the maximum level. And as a human being, as a young, very young human being, did you feel at that time? I mean, please be very honest with us. Did you feel an anger against Muslims looking at all these refugees coming from what was?
No, 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 no. There's no question of feeling anger against anybody. It was just the recognition was that one was, in fact, so busy worrying about helping people to survive that there was no question of anger. The time I've been talking about is exactly the time when my father helped his Muslim friends to with some funding and so on, so they could go move away. So this was not a question of anger.
So, the
Very
reason.
early one realized that anger is never a solution. That's what this few things that I had read about Gandhi and so on. You see, right around that time, the college which we went to, it used to be called Prince of Wales College, and we convinced the government to change the name to Gandhi Memorial College. And at that time, I was one of the editors. We produced a booklet with Gandhi's sayings and so on and so forth. And the one thing that was prominent again and again, it says, was his statement that the moment you get angry, you have lost the argument.
But Dr. Bhagat, see, that's a very admirable thing that at a young age, such a young age, you were able to understand it and practice it. But we also know of so many people who, because of the trauma they faced in 47, became angry at a particular community. If you're Muslim, you became so bloodthirsty
That,
towards Hindus and vice versa.
I'm aware of a lot of people who are very angry and are still are angry. While you're talking about that time, they still are angry. But at the same time, I have to remember the fact that the same sister I was talking about earlier, she would not be alive today if Liaquat Ali Khan and his people had not made sure that they provided a place for all the Hindu girls to be safe.
I see.
Therefore, we knew that there are all kinds of people there.
So was
There is,
your family in Lahore, were they able to get to India safely?
oh yeah, I mean, eventually she also settled down, but she was in very bad shape because her husband really made the mistake of thinking that he could go back to Lahore and get everything arranged. So he effectively disappeared
I
for
see.
close to 1.5 years. And no, and we were not in contact with her also because until quite time after the partition, in India and Kashmir had really no land contact. And they were very difficult, of course, in those days, as you well know, making a phone call was not an easy thing to do. In fact, we didn't know where she was for close to a year. She had been evacuated because one of her husband's friends was in the airlines and he was able to evacuate her to Delhi. Again, very nasty things happened to her, but let's not go into it. Eventually, we did see her 2 years, almost 2 years later, and and I have to say again, I had never heard her say anything negative about anybody. In fact, several years later, my brother's daughter married a Muslim gentleman, and that particular sister, in addition to everybody else, I wrote to you about that.
Yes.
She was the first one to encourage Asha. Go ahead, marry Farooq. He's a wonderful guy. We have met him, and he's as good as a human being as anybody can be. Who cares? And so we have a fully integrated family.
Dr. Bhagat, coming from Jammu and Kashmir, what do you have to say about Article 370? Was there a need for it? The fact that it was taken away, what is your understanding of it?
The accession of Kashmir happened when things were in a very unpleasant situation. And so at that time, the government of India made all kinds of promises. But there is also no question that as time passed, they broke every single promise. And then the final break was, of course, last year when they took away the special condition of Kashmir. So they have been, and because of the removal of that, now there are a large number of Hindus who are trying to buy property in Kashmir so that they can change the
Demographics.
well, because if they can change the number of uh, people, Hindus there, then you can claim that it is now a majority Hindu area and so on. And now don't forget the fact there is a part of Kashmir, Ladakh, which is actually totally Buddhist. Buddhism
Yeah.
disappeared from every part of India except Ladakh. So
And
even from
with this division of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh into three separate places by the BJP government also shows how criminal their mind is, that they think of everything in terms of religion.
yeah, well, that's the way they are made. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate that we have them, and they have appealed to all those things by keeping on telling, these guys are taking things away from you. If we are not careful soon, and it will be mainly a Muslim country. There will be more Muslims, and because so many Muslims are having children, and you are not, and whatnot and whatnot. Somebody did point out that the total number of wombs is fixed. And as long as the number of wombs is fixed, there is no way to can produce more children. Nobody has learned yet to produce children without a womb. So there is, I mean, the one of the easiest ways of making people start hating people is telling them that you are in danger. That's what is happening here. All this white supremacy is all consequence of that president of ours telling people that if you are not careful, the blacks will take over with 13% of the population.
So you think that fear is a major factor in producing hate?
Absolutely. One thing is fear, and then you use the fear in order to spread total nonsense, so to speak. I don't know if you have read too much about Q and whatnot, and but this country and in Europe, the kind of nonsense that Q is spreading,
Yeah, they
and
were.
that how many people believe it is amazing.
Yeah, they were even in that January 6th riot. They were the Q people were there.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, no, I mean, they are spreading this. One of those leaders, she is now a member of Congress. She was saying that the fires in California last year were generated because the Jews had set up lasers in the sky and used those lasers to set fires in California. Can you imagine anything more absurd than that?
Yeah, and the thing is that people are still supporting her.
Of course, that's what I'm saying. There is no dearth of people who feel, I mean, all these people who had come, by the way, there were Indians there also.
Yes, what is your take on that, Dr. Bhagat?
No, no,
How
yeah, they supported for a while. Trump was pushing that only educated people should be let into the country. So, which of course would make a slight preference for Indians because most Indians who come here are highly educated. So they were pushing Trump. Now, of course, uh, before going, he had to fight with India also, so he had changed. But these are people who, again, there is no explanation for all this.
something like partition happens, and then it is a trauma for entire life. It is not something that just happens in a day. For you, as somebody who experienced partition, what are the things you want to tell our viewers so they remain on guard?
Well, so let me say it this way. कुल आसमां से अच्छा है ये जहां हमारा, ये आशियां हमारा, ये दौर जहां हमारा, छाती पे इसकी लहरें, झीलें समुद्र दरिया, इन पानियों के दम से यकता है घर हमारा.
Beautiful.
बोलो सलाम अहिंसा, लिखो प्यार और शांति, सब हथियारों से बढ़कर ये धनुष है हमारा. जो बैर और बढ़ाए वो शायद बुरी बला है. इंसान है हम, जगत है, एक कुनबा है हमारा.
सही बात आपने कही. एक कुनबा है हमारा, और जिसने पार्टीशन देखा है और वो वायलेंस देखी है, वो कभी नहीं चाहेगा कि ऐसा कुछ फिर से हो.
You see, some years ago, I had gone to Pakistan. I was going around the world talking to graduate students. And in Islamabad, where we were staying, there were some people serving from Pimber or parts of Kashmir. And when he found out that I was from Jammu and Kashmir, he was so happy. And incredible. So how can you hate such a person? He was almost ready to touch my feet, but I lifted him up. What? Where is there time to hate? When we were in Lahore, we took a cab somewhere. He refused to charge us. आप तो हिंदुस्तान से आए हैं. मैंने कहा नहीं, मैं अमेरिका से आया. नहीं, वैसे तो आप हिंदुस्तान से ही है ना. मैंने कहा हाँ, आई वाज बोर्न देयर. तो मैं आपसे पैसे कैसे ले सकता हूँ? वेयर इज द हेट? और जब हम कराची में थे, तो we were this was an older gentleman. His father was in the front of the, and in many Muslim homes, the men, of course, sit in front in some room and everybody else in the back. While I was sitting there talking to him, his grandchildren came in. So he, of course, told them that I am from America, but originally I am from India. And the two kids said, ये तो हमारे जैसे ही लगते हैं. Somebody had told them that Indians are devils or whatever. And I'm sure after seeing me, those children went back and told me that हम लोग तो हिंदुस्तानियों को देखा है, वो सब हमारे जैसे ही, कोई फर्क ही नहीं. भाई जैसे आपको last time when we were there, I pointed out to you that you don't have to appeal to religion today. Science has told us that every living object on the earth is made up of DNA. Whether you think in terms of a cell whose total size is about a billionth of a meter, or an elephant, it's all strings of DNA. And the virus which is killing us is also strings of DNA with protein around it. So the any difference, and in fact, the human genome has been studied in some detail. 99.9% of each one of us exactly the same as the one of anybody else. We differ from each other only in one part in 1,000. So where is the source for heat? You are hating yourself, so to speak.
That's a good point.
If
That's a
somebody
great
chooses
point.
to hate himself, that is his choice. But it makes no sense.
That's a great point, Dr. Bhagat. Dr. Bhagat, I will ask you a last question for today to
Yes.
wrap up this the partition thing. What do you think could have been done differently?
Well, the point is, I cannot, in some sense, I can't answer that question because you had to have some degree of reasonably detailed knowledge of the leadership of India at that time. But the fact remains that in the fear that the Muslims had was that because of the large percentage of Hindus, they are going to be ill treated. And at that time, you could turn around and said no. And Gandhi, of course, also proposed that perhaps we should ask Jinnah to become the first prime minister of India, and so, but it didn't fly. But now you can see, 75 years later, some of that is happening.
So, Dr. Bhagat, I will tell you something very interesting. Tushar Gandhi, we were interviewing him and we talked to him in great detail. We will be talking again with him in one of the programs that has recently been produced. It's a radio program. He said that India was literally hurtling into this situation of complete disaster in 1947-48. He said that the RSS was planning with the help of the erstwhile rajas, especially the Raja of Gwalior and Alwar. They were trying to overthrow the democratically elected government of India and turn India into a Hindu Rashtra with Manusmriti as the constitution. They had the money from the Rajas, and of course, they had the big army of people who were going to Shakhas. And he says that the only thing that changed the course from turning into a Hindu Rashtra back to a democratic nation was the death of Gandhi. Because Gandhi was killed, people were shocked, and many of them turned away from that Hindutva philosophy. So, do you think that this is perhaps in our system, in our DNA? I hate to use that word, but that there's something seriously wrong in our society that every so often we need a shock. Otherwise, we end up doing this.
Well, it's not just India. Every country is like that, unfortunately. If the
But then that proves the point that there's something wrong with us as human beings.
well, one way of seeing this is that if you look at religion, one thing that religion teaches you at least from my way of thinking, that we may look different, but there is one property we all have, and that is we are all imperfect. And all education, all religion, all tells you work so you can become closer to perfect. But we can never become that. So it's a part of our imperfection. We have to live with it and keep it as far away from us. The aspiration of the human mind is to become perfect one day. But while we are on the path, we are all imperfect.
I see. But in terms of partition, you don't think that, well, what is it that went wrong? Because obviously the common people did not want it. The common people also did not want to participate in the violence. So is it just some of these people like Jinnah and Golwalkar and so on? Or is there something larger than that? Of course, the role of the British. But where is it that the national leadership failed? Why did it actually happen? I guess that's what I'm trying to understand. But it's a
No, but you see, you are forgetting the fact that Gandhiji's following never got beyond a small portion of India. Right around the time when he was even helping India becoming independent, it's not clear that his following was much more than few percent or no more than that.
you think so?
Well, the point of the matter is that there were strong anti-Gandhi things going on in the temples and in the gurdwaras and in the mosques.
Actually, you are very right that there was this whole anti Gandhi movement. In fact, just before Gandhi was killed, the RSS magazines were publishing threats to him, and the government did nothing about it.
That's right. No, not just threats to him. There were several actual attempts.
That is true.
Fortunately, they didn't succeed. But yes, there were several actual attempts, but the government didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And even when the partition papers were signed, they made sure that Gandhi didn't find out. I mean, I may be wrong, but from what some of the stuff I read, Azad was carrying the partition paper with him when he went to see Gandhi, but he didn't tell him that they had already signed the partition paper.
Do you think of partition as the worst thing that happened to India?
Well, that is an impossible question to answer.
In your life, if you look at India, do you think things would have been very different or things would have been better today had the partition not happened?
That's, as I said, that's impossible to question to answer because the India of today and the Pakistan of today are very different from what they were close to 100 years ago. Because
True.
partition, our talk of partition began close to 100 years ago.
Yes.
And slowly and steadily, it got more and more people. And I mean, you keep saying that the average people didn't want it, but that's partly because of the fact that a significant part of India really had nothing to do with the partition. Partition affected mainly Punjab and Bengal. Nobody in the south had any idea of partition, or for that matter, even in Madhya Pradesh or somewhere. Major part of the country had no effect at all.
Yes. Dr. Bhagat, before we end this today's session, I would be very happy if you can sing a song for us, something that you like, or something that you wrote, or something that you find in another poet's words that you'd like to express.
Okay, I will sing you something that we used to sing in the beginning of 1949 when we used to have prayer meeting.
Please.
किसको कहूँ मैं अल्लाह बाबा, किसको कहूँ मैं राम, एक ही छाया एक ही माया, एक ही सारा काम रे बाबा, एक ही सारा काम। एक माँ के लाखों बच्चे इस धरती पे धाम, इनमें कौन मुसलमान बाबा, किसका हिंदू नाम, किसको कहूँ मैं राम, किसको कहूँ मैं अल्लाह बाबा, किसको कहूँ मैं राम, एक ही छाया एक ही माया, एक ही सारा काम रे बाबा, एक ही सारा काम। God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhagat. We will continue our conversation with Dr. Bhagat in the future episodes. Dr. Bhagat is a very special person for us at Peace Vigil, always encouraging us and supporting us. Here's a short clip of one of our workshops where he's sitting in the front row, making sure we know that he's always there to guide us and support us. If you like this video, please do share it and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Remember, peace needs all of us. Arrested or attacked, or then what happens? It's all right for you?
I want to face it.
You have to face it. So I find this very tricky. You know, I agree with you, Auntie. Not everybody is as brave as you, though. But I have personally seen people come to blows because somebody was eating beef or pork. They're willing to fight and kill for it. But not on such issues. Not on letting the refugees in, helping the immigrants, helping the minority, Dalit, Muslim, Christian.